Politics are moving markets. In the UK, we've seen the announcement of a new prime minister, which has calmed the markets. We've seen a stronger sterling. We've seen bond yields come back down. It's a very different story where politics seem to be causing turmoil in the market in China, where we've seen the reappointment of President Xi for another 5-year term. It's sent the stock market falling. It's sent the currency falling. And in the US, we also have politics emerging where we have the start of the midterms. I'm joined by Sunil, Krishnan. We're going to talk about politics this week. We're going to try and wrap up all of these three topics in around about 5 minutes. Sunil, let's start with the UK. Why do markets love Rishi?
Well, I mean, we need to kind of put this into context. It's a relative game, and I think they love what they've got now, maybe a bit more than what they had before. And just by way of recap, I think the real challenge before was, yes, some big spending, but partly the nature of that spending. So in addition to maybe the biggest part was the emergency kind of cap on energy prices, but that was temporary. And I think what really concerned markets was firstly adding on top a bunch of unfunded permanent tax cuts, which would need to be funded through permanent borrowing. And also then sidelining some of the watchdogs and independent bodies like the Bank of England or the Office for Budget Responsibility. Now, a lot of that was undone even before Rishi kind of won his appointment, because Jeremy Hunt had essentially walked back on all the tax cuts, and it was clear that there was going to be more of a role for the OBR as well. But that said, to have Rishi in charge compared to some of his rivals, I think probably offered some reassurance that they were going to continue on that path. And so in that sense, I've seen it said that the UK is now reaping a bit of a dullness dividend after all the excitement that went before.
Okay. So some stability in the UK. Bond yields were over 5, or well, close to 5% at one stage, and now sub 4%. So good news story there. Very different story in China. I mean, I think if you were to look at market reaction, you would say that the markets seem to dislike President Xi's policies even more than Liz Truss's policies. So what is going on in China? What has sent the stock market falling?
So no surprise that Xi was reappointed, and it was wholly expected. I suppose the two bits of news that came out is firstly, these types of set piece events are very often a great opportunity for a leader to impose their vision, what's going to set the tone for policy for the next 3 to 5 years. And in this case, it wasn't necessarily addressing China's economic slowdown, where we've seen the combination of the zero COVID policy really restraining consumption. The property market has slowed very sharply over the last couple of years and maybe created a little bit of financial system risk. That wasn't what was addressed. What was addressed instead was really more inequality. So thinking more about, for example, wealthy individuals and wealthy corporations. And I think for international investors who very often come quite a long way down the queue in terms of who's important when the Chinese state and Chinese companies negotiate, it perhaps wasn't a very encouraging sign for how important international investors are going to be over the next 5 years. So I think that's probably a bit of a driver there.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly seen as being not quite pro markets, and that's been weighing on markets for some time. But in the last week or so, it's not been a good time for the Chinese market. Turning to the US really quickly, start of the midterms, quick update on where we're at there. And I guess the ultimate question that most people would probably want to know is, are we seeing the path being paved for the return of Donald Trump?
Well, just by way of recap, so the midterms are basically the congressional elections that take place when it's not a presidential election year. So basically every 2 years in between the presidential elections, you're going to get a midterm. Some of the Senate seats come up for re-election, a lot more of the House seats coming up for re-election. And the base case for markets for some time has been that the slim control that the Democrats have of both houses would probably be given up. So the Republicans have a good chance of capturing the House, and they may also get a majority in the Senate. Now, even if they take control of one of those houses, what it really does is throws a lot of sand in the wheels of policy making, because you have one part of government that's effectively saying, no, Mr. President, you can't get what you want. And the contrast, which markets have had to think about more recently, is actually maybe the Democrats polling a little bit better. And if they retain control of those houses, what we understand is that they would perhaps look to enact more of the policies that they couldn't get through in the first term. And the general market expectation is that would probably mean more spending, more borrowing, probably therefore leading to higher interest rates in terms of the Treasury market, US government bonds. So that's something that markets have been digesting. Now, to your point about President Trump, the interesting thing is in a lot of places, it looks as though what's actually brought the Democrats back in the polls is some of the Trump-backed candidates maybe not performing that well with the swing voters. So I think you could see a situation where maybe a disappointing outcome for the Republicans does reflect quite badly on the Trump agenda, but equally a positive surprise. And I think we know who's going to be claiming all the credit.
Agreed. Look, Sunil, that's been fantastic. It's a great summary. We've covered three big areas across the world: the US, China, and the UK. Each of them having some sort of an impact on markets. I've no doubt we'll be back talking with these topics again. Until next week, we'll put another fund manager on the spot. We'll cover the big news story of the week. Take care. See you next week.